To get started, I wanted to understand where the Beatles spent their time.
Hey, what's it got to do with you?
If some karma's gonna get you.
In this video response, we will take a look at Mike Williams' timeline. Mike Williams has designed a timeline to limit as much as he possibly can the Beatles' free time, in an attempt to leave his viewers with the idea that the Beatles had very little to no time at all to write songs. According to Mike's calculations, from 1962 to 1966, the Beatles were so busy running from the recording studio
Take 6.
How could I done shield and she rolled down?
to filming their movies
Roll sound.
Rolling.
Sound production, take 2.
to playing gigs, that it couldn't be done. They were too busy. They could not have written their songs. However, there are no actual calculations. Mike's timeline is, to say the least, a very altered one, a construct of his own that bears no relation to reality whatsoever. In an effort to persuade his viewers that the Beatles had no time, Mike uses 4 interwoven strategies. Strategy number 1. Mike extends the recording time of each of the 6 albums by up to 13.5 times the true figure. For example, he tells us that A Hard Day's Night album was recorded in 125 days, a whopping incredible 4 months. Despite Mike's colour-coded graphs with arrows and everything, the actual amount of time to record that album was not 125 days, which is 4 months. It was 9 days. All of that extra time that Mike has added for each of the albums is now counted by Mike as time that the Beatles did not have to write music. Mike's figures for recording albums span so much of the year that he can make it appear that recording albums, filming movies and live performances overlapped, which is strategy number 2. According to Mike Williams, these 3 activities were done in parallel. They would run concurrently. According to him, the Beatles would be cramming these 3 activities all into the same day. Therefore, of course, there was no time to write music. Despite the fact that Mike tells us 30 times in a 15.5-minute time span, and despite the fact that he has graphs and charts with overlap written on them, there was no overlap. These 3 activities of gigs, making movies and recording albums were always done completely separately. Strategy number 3. Mike takes each Beatles live performance and deducts a full 24 hours. Despite having complete days free before a gig lasting just 20 minutes, and despite having complete evenings free after the gig, Mike deducts the full 24 hours, eating up to 68% of the year in his graphs and charts, in which the Beatles had no time to write music. Underpinning these 3 strategies is strategy Number 4. Mike's the songwriting process. Here we find that Mike attempts to inculcate his audience with the false notion that all music artists go through a very long, drawn-out, protracted, laborious, convoluted and clinical and therefore very time-consuming process to write songs. Mike's particular process, however, is not one shared by musicians generally and not one shared by some of the most successful artists in pop rock music history. Mike's meaningless graphs and charts, of which there are 8 within the time span of just 15.5 minutes, are used to sell the illusion that he has researched assiduously and figured out mathematically, scientifically, that the Beatles had no time to write music.
Now we're going to take a look at how the Beatles spent their time between 1962 and 1966. Obviously, this analysis is not an exact science, but I believe it will give us a good estimate on how their time was allocated.
We can tell immediately from Mike's statement that we are going to be deceived. We don't need an estimate. We can find out very easily and exactly what the Beatles were doing on a day-to-day basis. Every professional activity, as is the case with any band or celebrity, is by necessity meticulously logged and recorded by TV, radio and recording studios. All of that information has been compiled into a database available to us on at least 3 websites. We know precisely where and when and with whom and the duration of each interview. We know if it was a lunchtime gig in the Cavern Club or if it was an evening gig in the Cavern Club. We can find out when they entered the studio, how many takes of each song there were, right down to when they had a break during the day. We can find out when they were on the set of their movies and what scene was being shot on any particular day. And we can find out exactly when they had complete days free from any professional engagements, right down to the locations and durations of their holidays. So, we at least do have an exact science, called counting, otherwise known as adding up. We just have to add up the days that have no activities. We don't need a good estimate. Over the 4 years and 8 months between 1962 and September 1966, the Beatles had 1 year and 8 months completely free. This figure is for entire days off with no professional engagements whatsoever. 1 year and 8 months are complete blank pages in the Beatles' itinerary. Their time off. These figures, through spurious means, have been dramatically reduced by Mike Williams. Contrary to what Mike Williams tries to brainwash us with, these figures are just the logged and recorded facts of the matter. However, what is not included in the 1 year and 8 months are the entire days free before a 20-minute gig, entire evenings free after the 20-minute gig, or entire days free before very short interviews, often lasting just minutes, or entire evenings free after the interview, or complete days free before arriving at a TV studio in the evening to perform a few songs. All of that free time where music could potentially be created is also eaten up by Mike's corrupted figures, percentages and greedy graphs and charts. Mike Williams' timeline, just like the rest of his 4.5 hour presentation, is an inversion of the truth. The only positive that we could attribute to Mike's timeline is that it's unique, as it completely contradicts recorded history. As is the case consistently and throughout Mike's entire presentation, he completely bombards his viewers with the very same calculated and manipulative mind control techniques that we are subjected to on a daily basis by mainstream TV, advertising, internet get-rich-quick schemes, lifestyle gurus and coaches, and politicians who are well versed in the art of implanting suggestions through the use of neuro-linguistic programming. Mike makes very blatant use of these techniques to manipulate, deceive and fool the viewer, and ultimately, for anyone who has fallen for this, make a fool of the viewer.
It's science. It's science. It's science.
Obviously, this analysis is not an exact science, but I believe it will give us a good estimate on how their time was allocated.
Not an exact science, but a science nonetheless, or so Mike would have his audience believe. From the beginning of his presentation to the end of the timeline, which is just 28 minutes in total, his audience are planted with 26 scientific terms, narrated and printed on slides. This is an average repetition of a scientific term almost every 1 minute. The first opening slide, just 2 seconds into the presentation, tells us that this is an investigative analysis. And then, in just those first 28 minutes, the audience are planted with investigative analysis, findings, analysis, findings, stream of evidence, analysis, analysing, analysing, analyse, findings, analyse, science, analysis, data, 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 variable in the equation, data, analyse, calculated, analysis, data, analysis, analysis, data. The sheer inundation of the viewer with so many scientific terms in such a short space of time is a hypnotic, subconscious programming. The repetition of these terms is to draw the viewer into believing that the Beatles' timeline actually needs to be worked out in the first place, as if over a 60-year period the Beatles' schedule hadn't already been well documented. We don't need science. The viewer's subconscious is consistently fed a stream of scientific terms which assist Mike in propping up charts and graphs with highly manipulated figures and percentages, and also to prop up charts and graphs that are actually void of any information whatsoever. The graphs and charts and language used are nothing but smoke and mirrors.
You did say Quay correctly. That's my blog. And then I have this alter ego where I am a professional master hypnotherapist and I practice out of North Carolina.
Strategy number 1. Mike extends the recording time of albums by up to 13.5 times the true figure, thereby adding 1 year and 2 months in total to the true recording time of the 6 albums. Mike introduces his first graph and begins the very deliberate technique of confusing his audience.
Also, the number of days between the start and stop dates is not contiguous in all cases. For example, the making of With the Beatles was recorded in 7 sessions contained within the 97 days.
Apart from the Please Please Me album, which was recorded in 1 day, the number of days between the start and stop dates is not continuous with any of the albums. They were all recorded non-consecutively. But Mike is correct with the second part of his statement. With the Beatles was recorded in 7 sessions, dotted between the 18th of July and the 23rd of October 1963. The album was recorded in 7 sessions within a time period of 97 days. But just 26 seconds later, Mike tells us,
We can see the Beatles spent 1 day recording their first album, Please Please Me, and then 97 days to make With the Beatles.
We were just told correctly that With the Beatles was recorded in 7 sessions contained within the 97 days. Now it's 97 days to make the album. So Mike has now taken that whole span between July and October, counting each day as a recording day. In this way, he has just added 90 days to the recording time, which he then proceeds to do with the rest of the albums.
125 days to make A Hard Day's Night, 76 days for Beatles for Sale, 124 days for Help, 37 days for Rubber Soul, and 77 days on Revolver.
Let's look at the actual figures concerning each album.
And then 97 days to make With the Beatles.
Again, it was not 97 days or 3 months to record the album, which is 13 times the true figure. It was 7 days. Those extra 90 days now are counted as days when the Beatles could not have written music. Within those 97 days, the Beatles had 26 complete days free with no commitments. The 26 complete days off include a consecutive 16 days free where they all took holidays abroad. Now, just to be absolutely clear, for all the free days quoted for these albums, we are talking about complete time off. No TV, no radio, no interviews, no live performances, complete time free of any professional engagements.
125 days to make A Hard Day's Night.
125 days, which is almost 4 months. Obviously, the Beatles did not spend 4 months recording 13 songs. Those 13 songs were recorded in 9 days. Mike's figure is 13.5 times the true figure, or 116 days more than the true figure, or over 3.5 months more than the true figure. During that time span of 125 days, the Beatles had 45 days, or almost 1.5 months completely free of any commitments. This includes a consecutive 28 days in May, where they all took holidays abroad.
76 days for Beatles for Sale.
It was not 76 days. Mike's figure is 10.5 times the true figure, or almost 2.5 months more than the true figure of just 7 days. Just prior to the first date of recording Beatles for Sale, the Beatles had an entire week free of any commitments, and during that time span of 76 days, they had 21 days completely free of any professional commitments.
124 days for Help.
Of course, it was not 124 days or 4 months to record 14 songs. It was 12 days. During those 4 months, the Beatles had 1.5 months completely free of any professional engagements. Just prior to the last 5 days of recording the Help album, the Beatles had 28 days completely free, during which Paul McCartney and Jane Asher and John and Cynthia Lennon took holidays abroad.
37 days for Rubber Soul.
Rubber Soul was not recorded in 37 days, but in 16 sessions within a time span of 30 days, with the last 7 days spent mixing by George Martin. The Beatles had 6 weeks completely free before the first date of recording. During those 30 days, the Beatles had 12 days completely free of any professional commitments, a trifling, inconsequential matter that Mike has omitted from his investigative analysis of the Rubber Soul album, his elephant in the room.
and 77 days on Revolver.
77 Days was not spent on Revolver. That album was recorded in 30 sessions within the 77 days. Just prior to the first date of recording the Revolver album, the Beatles had an entire 3 months and 21 days completely free of any professional engagements. And during that time span of 77 days, the Beatles had a complete 38 days free, i.e. half of those 77 days were completely free. So Revolver then was recorded in 30 sessions within a time period of 4.5 months, which was completely free of any commitments. No TV, no radio, no interviews, no live performances, nothing. 30 days in the studio during 4.5 months completely off. By counting all the days in between, Mike Williams has added an extra 455 days worth of recording time onto the true recording time, which is over 64.5 weeks. Or, put another way, Mike has added 1 year and 2 months extra onto the true recording time. This is time now where, according to Mike, the Beatles could not have written music. Later, during his pie chart section, Mike will inform us that he has normalised the data. This sounds very scientific again, but what this actually means is that Mike has to slightly reduce these enormous figures for recording albums, otherwise he wouldn't be able to fit them into his pie charts. Mike's enormous figures for recording albums span so much of the year that they allow Mike to employ his other strategy, which is to fool his audience into believing that the 3 activities of recording albums, playing live and the filming of the 2 movies overlapped, that they ran concurrently, that those 3 activities were shoved, crammed, jammed and squeezed into the same day, therefore, of course, allowing no time to write music, which again is completely, verifiably, 100% untrue.
125 days to Make a Hard Day's Night, 76 days for Beatles for Sale, 124 days for Help, 37 days for Rubber Soul, and 77 days on Revolver.
It is crystal clear that we have been lied to. At the very beginning of Mike's presentation, he tells us,
I pulled together a small team of researchers, comprised of musicians, songwriters, composers, and arrangers, each with decades of experience.
A Beatles, and I quote, researcher, along with such an experienced team, informing us with 8 graphs and charts that these are the actual recording times of the albums, is no accident. It's no mistake. It is evidently deliberate and absolutely indefensible. Anyone presenting these grossly exaggerated recording times as the truth in an attempt to fool their audience and discredit and destroy people's reputations cannot be taken seriously and should not be trusted.
And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple.
Excuse me. Coach, we just...
How do you sleep? How do you sleep at night?
When you gotta go, I always say.